And salutations to my esteemed guests and subscribers. It is me, of course, Sugi JRPG here, and today, as promised, I will be reviewing the Tales of Vesperia Definitive Edition for PC. Now, the best place to start is to go through the differences between the Definitive Edition and the original Xbox 360 version that most of us are familiar with, outside from those hardcore fans that basically decided to import their game from Japan for PS3. Now, the most obvious thing that you are going to be seeing as a difference here is the HD resolution for the game, the HD textures. The game just looks visually a lot better than the original game did. The FPS is significantly higher in battle and outside of combat. Then the costumes that were only Japan exclusive are now available in the Definitive Edition. Also, Flynn and Patty, which were only playable characters on the PS3 version of the game, are also now available in the Definitive Edition. Then there is, of course, the option to opt in for the Japanese dub of the game, which you can, by the way, switch around by restarting the game. So in case you want to try the both English and the Japanese out, you can do that. Now, I kind of decided to go with the actual English version because it's actually not that bad, and also that's kind of what I grew up with when I was, playing the game originally on the Xbox 360. But I think both the Japanese and the English dub for this game are actually rather good. Then there are some other minor things and elements like online leaderboards and things like these, but the aforementioned things are, in my opinion, the most important elements of the Definitive Edition. There's some bug fixes and stuff like that, obviously, in the mix, but it's basically just, the complete edition for you in HD remaster. Now, let's kind of tackle on what is this game about? What is the premise of the story? And then latter part of the video, we are going to be going into spoiler territory and giving my review of the actual story. But I just want to lay out what is the kind of the premise here. So Vesperia is set in the world of Terca Lumeris, and there is this energy source in the world known as blastia. Not the best translation, I would say. I'm not sure actually do they use that in the Japanese one, but it's not a name I like. And then you have these protective barriers that protect these cities. By having a barrier in the city will keep the monsters at bay. This is kind of like one of the key mechanics of the world, so to speak. And then you have this air, which is kind of like a source of energy as well. And some of the bigger themes around the plot in the game are revolving around Blastia for sure. But I think at the end of the day, it's a game about the characters. And our main character is called Yuri Lowell, and he is a former Imperial soldier. And he, in the beginning of the game, kind of gets to this task and goes... He lives in the big city, the main city of the game, and he ends up going into the Noble District, and from the Noble District goes into the castle and meets this noblewoman known as Estelle. And then they kind of go on to this crazy journey throughout the world and meet other characters around their, journey. And basically, that's kind of like the main premise. It starts out with like this long sort of a journey, and then it kind of expands into the saving the world type of a thing. And that's kind of like people were talking about it as a nice build-up. I kind of agree with that. It doesn't have to, like, the first mission, we gotta save the world. It kind of builds up into that, which is kind of like natural and feels more fluid. And then there is, they form this guild known as Brave Vesperia, and then there are other guilds in the world which, do different stuff like hunt monsters. Some of them are, mining precious materials and artifacts, and some are merchants guilds. So the different types of guilds, and they are kind of like the power balance guilds versus the empire, so to speak. And that's the whole power dynamic in the game. Tales games in general don't seem to have that many factions and like independent, like, political elements. It's never really known from that. So it's not the most deepest thing at the same time. And that's kind of like the premise, okay, laid down in there. So in the typical fantasy type of a thing, but it's not like something that I would go compare into other JRPG story or anything like that. It has some unique aspects to it. Now let's kind of go dive into the other, things about the game. Best, is obviously to talk about the combat. Now the combat is like an evolution of the Symphonia combat. Symphonia is heralded as like the best in the series. I kind of still stand by that based on my playing experiences. But Symphonia definitely, after I kind of like played the definitive edition, it does not have the most aged combat system. For Vesperia's combat, which is a lot more improved over the Symphonia's one, I think it has aged a lot better. It's still maybe a bit more small tempo. You might prefer like Zestria's combat, which was actually pretty good. I think it was in a fine tune and balance. It had certain flaws into it, but overall I think it's one of the best, if not the best combat system in the Tales games so far that I've tried. But Vesperia's combat is considered as one of the best, and I definitely agree with that. And it's, you know, it's the right speed, it has staggering systems, it has depth. You know, the main basic gameplay, yeah, you don't need to learn how to combo or use the mystic arts, but this is something that you can learn in the game. So the game has easy learning curve, which is expanded as you play through more on the game, but there is that level of depth also inside the game for the hardcore fans who want to experience that and try that in the harder difficulties of the game. Now, the game is also pretty long. Okay, that's something we have to obviously address here, and I think, well, when we go into more in the story elements of the game, I think that this is something you kind of have to prepare on. There is a lot of side quests inside the game, and I recommend using a guide to do them, because you can miss out a lot of them, because there's time windows when you need to be in this place, talking to this guy when he's taking a shit, and yada yada yada. So there's a lot of these checks and balances that you have to meet, and then there's obviously like this completionist thing and replay throughs obviously that you can go through. And oh yeah, I forgot to mention that you can play it on multiplayer as well, your friends controlling other characters. I'm not sure is that something that is available on every single version, and how does that differ, but I would argue that it is indeed maybe in the PC version as well. I gotta actually confirm that in the comment section. And in terms of like, you know, collecting the items and the menus, skill systems, I don't really have anything to complain about there. I think the synthesis system is a lot better than it is in Zestria, for example, something that I preferred a lot more. There is an interesting world that you can explore through world map. I kind of wish that more JRPGs today would have praised the classic world map experience. I just love it and dig it, and it just kind of gives you more like an exploratory, sort of like a more like a expedition, or like a, you know, more like an adventure feel to it, I guess, finding these, you know, places here and here. You get to move with your ship, and over at some point you also get an airship basically. And obviously you can walk through that world map, and there's monsters there which you go into by moving to them, and then battle starts in a classical Tales manner, which is very good. And then there is some other issues inside the game, like at times in the game you don't know where you need to go. And I like literally had to go to the walkthrough. You had like a, you know, event in the game, and the characters did something or something, and then you just suddenly needed to go somewhere without like proper explanation or references. Oh, I needed to go here. So it's a bit of cat and mouse sometimes to think, oh, where do I need to go and who do I need to exactly talk to inside the game, and that was kind of annoying at times. I'm not saying it's something that happens super much, and this is more of an element that obviously is something that existed a lot more in these older generation JRPGs. But at the time that Vesperia came out, I think it was kind of getting already kind of outdated. Now, in terms of the music, I would say it's, you know, I have to say that in JRPGs, the music soundtrack sound, you know, the level of a soundtrack quality is so high already. So I can't just like say in good faith that this is a great soundtrack when it's not. It's like very average. For some people, it's gonna be, you know, reigniting nostalgia. I get it. And the opening song is amazing, both the English and the Japanese version, which I performed by the same person. I love it. It's a classic. It really touches inside. It just had that type of a connection to me when listening. It just brought a lot of those nostalgia feels. And so I love that. But a lot of the other things, I'm not like super fan of. And, you know, when I look at Arise, which is coming out today, by the way, like that one has just a phenomenal soundtrack. So I don't know that even if this is like comparable to that. But let's kind of more decipher about the other aspects before we go into the story. Spoilers. So there are, as I said, there are a lot of side quests, side bosses. I didn't do exactly absolutely everything. There's obviously the cooking system that we are known from the previous games. You can collect recipes and things like that. There's not really other mini games outside from the snowboarding thing, which I think is, you know, for a JRPG mini game, is not actually that bad. And you can get some nice costume rewards from that by doing those. But that's something that comes available very late down the game. And, you know, overall the gameplay experience is pretty good. It has some aspects that are kind of outdated, but overall kind of good. Now let's kind of jump into the characters and the story. And there will be some spoilers here, so if you don't want to pass on any longer in this video, I suggest you come back after you complete the game. So, first of all, Yuri Lowell, which is our main character. I mean, a lot of people have praised him because he is very different from a lot of main characters. He's a bit more of a anti-hero of sorts because he's a bit of an anarchist in a way. He doesn't obey the law always, and he's just like, okay, I gotta go violent here because this is the only solution. And he will be wiping out bad guys because, you know, he doesn't see that the justice system will take care of them and stuff like that. And that is interesting. So it's a bit different of a main character, and the whole cast inside the game, I would say, is pretty good. There is a form of a character development for some of them, but not for all. I don't think that Yuri really had like massive dilemmas inside the game, or at least the acting performance really didn't sell me on that. But there are characters like Estelle, Flynn, and our, you know, favorite kid here. They kind of went through their own character development arcs, which were pretty good, and I think that those were very nice to see inside the game, and I really appreciated that. And it would have been more amazing to see kind of like, you know, maybe end of the game there would be like a flash forward 2 years from now, and you would be seeing where the characters would be in. And I think it's like also visually the character archetype, but we have like only non-humanoid character in the whole Tales series. We have Rapide, which is a dog. And the game, you know, going back a bit into the combat system, all the characters do feel very different from each other. Like Rapide is a very fast assassin type of a character. Yuri has a lot of like melee things and sword things. And then you have your casters, and like Judith is like aerial fighters. So there's versatility in the gameplay inside the game, which is something that has to be, you know, applauded for. And the characters are pretty good. Like in Symphonia, while it's maybe considered the best game, some of the characters were indeed a bit bland in my opinion, or one-trick ponies. And you have a bit of that. Maybe Rita is kind of like a one-trick pony, also getting triggered and stuff, kind of one-dimensional in that sense. Now, what comes to the story, as I kind of alluded earlier, I think the game is too long for certain aspects. Like, I felt like it was a bit dragged out. And also, one of the things that, for example, Final Fantasy series has done really well is that how they build up the villains. They show the villains, not always in the very beginning of the game, but somewhere early on, they're just kind of like mentioned, or they, you know, seem as a kind of like a mysterious character, and then as more time goes on, they're kind of build it up, like Sephiroth, Kuja, Seymour. These are characters that, you know, are introduced really well manner, and they serve as a major villains, and very well done villains. In this one, there's sort of a 3 villains. One is kind of non-existent because you don't really battle it, and then the 2 others are kind of like, well, they're sort of a good guys at the same time, and that's a bit of a problem when you start to build up a, you know, a good, when you build heroes, you need to build good villains too. And I think the villains in this game are very lacking. We could argue that Duke, which is sort of the main boss in the game, is build it out a bit, but like not in a significant way. He's like standing in somewhere, gives meaningless dialogue, and which doesn't really play into much, like being, you know, very cryptic, and that's it. Like, he doesn't exactly, are not reeking, you know, that villain potential or the good build-up of his power or anything. What is his, you know, part to play in the world and everything. So I didn't like that, and I don't think the story maybe there are parts about it that I don't like. I mean, the character developments are all good, but I think there was a lot of like unnecessary stuff that happened in the story, and a lot of characters that did a lot of things without like really explaining why they were doing things. Like, was this in the realm of logic for them? And just like they kind of like needed a more development throughout the game to, you know, make them more of an interesting characters, but instead they ended up just being kind of filler in some aspects, like you know, Alexius, which was sort of a like villain, but he wasn't really that much built up. He just suddenly in one point of the story, which is probably the worst like progressing part, like from one scene to another, it just pops out and, oh, I'm the villain, by the way, and then like he dies really shortly after in the game, sort of a. So there are these aspects which, you know, the story is not the greatest in my opinion, but it does kind of like do good character build up. But if you don't care about the characters, you are gonna be not so interested in the story as a whole. But that's kind of like my overall take on Vesperia. I think it kind of has a good combat, but it doesn't have a great story as Symphonia. And also maybe some of the side missions or the, like, you know, alternative dungeons things didn't seem that promising to me in this game versus some of the other ones. So that was maybe a bit lackluster in my opinion. But overall, I thought it was an enjoyable experience. Very just kind of stretched out. It could have been 10 hours shorter game. It could have maybe get rid of a couple of dungeons in the middle, and I would have enjoyed it more as an experience, because it came a bit of a drag to finish out the game, and I felt like this was getting very repetitive here and there inside the game. But that's my take. I still recommend it for a lot of Tales fans. It's a lot of good bang for the buck, and in case you like something like Symphonia and some of these older JRPG games, this is definitely a good pick for you. Thanks for watching. I will be seeing you in the next video.